This video is brought to you by Henson Shaving. Today, Romania's president steps down, extending the country's political crisis. The Gaza ceasefire looks increasingly fragile, and the EU prepares for a radical budget overhaul. From TLDR News, this is your daily briefing for Tuesday the 11th of February, 2025. Romania's pro-Western president Klaus Iohannis has stepped down amid the country's ongoing political crisis, which saw the results of its 2024 presidential election annulled in December of last year, amid claims of Russian interference. For some background on this, the first round of Romania's presidential election on November 24th resulted in a shock victory for the far-right pro-Russian candidate Călin Georgescu, who was previously a little-known university professor, with him receiving 22.9% of the vote. This was a huge jump from the roughly 5% of the polling he'd been getting before the election, although it wasn't enough to secure an outright majority, meaning that the election would require a second round. Initially, Romania's Constitutional Court accepted the first round results, but later decided to annul them. This is because in the following weeks, classified intelligence information suggested there had been a huge Russian-backed social media campaign in favor of Georgescu, amounting to election interference. As such, Romania's Constitutional Court decided to cancel the second round runoff, extending the tenure of incumbent pro-Western president Klaus Iohannis. At the time, Iohannis praised the court's decision, saying in a statement that the constitution serves as a shield against threats to democracy, and adding that in turbulent times, state institutions are called upon to act with calm, wisdom, and respect for the law. Iohannis also said that he would stay on as president until the next election rerun in May. So why has Iohannis stepped down now? Well, it's largely because of public pressure. Since the court's decision to annul the election, which Georgescu described as a coup d'etat, there have been mass protests against the government, with as many as 10,000 Romanians marching on the streets of Bucharest last month. Several opposition parties, including the far-right Alliance for the Unity of Romanians, the Nationalist SOS Party, and the Party of Young People, have called for Iohannis to be impeached. So, under mounting pressure, Iohannis resigned on Monday, saying that he was doing so to spare Romania from its current crisis. Meanwhile, support for Georgescu has only increased. Georgescu welcomed Iohannis' resignation, calling it a victory for the people of Romania, and saying in a post on X, it was time for a return of the rule of law, resume second round of elections. Before we continue, just a reminder that as of next Monday, the daily briefing will be swapping to an audio-only format. You can keep listening on YouTube, but if you prefer, you can also find us on your favorite podcast app right now by searching for the daily briefing. Next up, the Gaza ceasefire deal is looking increasingly fragile, as Hamas announced that it will be suspending the release of Israeli hostages, accusing Israel of violating the terms of the ceasefire, prompting US President Donald Trump to warn that all hell would break loose if hostages weren't returned by midday Saturday. On Monday, Hamas accused Israel of violating the ceasefire deal over the past 3 weeks, including by delaying the return of displaced people to northern Gaza, not allowing aid to enter the enclave, and shelling and gunfire in various areas of the Strip. The group said that the handover of hostages, scheduled for Saturday, would be postponed until further notice, and until Israel commits and compensates for the past weeks retroactively. Trump called Hamas's statement terrible, and said that he would let it be Israel's decision over what happens to the ceasefire, but added that as far as I'm concerned, if all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time, I would say cancel it and all bets are off and let hell break out. Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, said that Hamas's announcement was itself a complete violation of the ceasefire agreement, and added that he had instructed the IDF to prepare at the highest level of alert for any possible scenario in Gaza, and to protect the communities. This latest development has caused concern for the family of Israeli hostages, with the Hostages and Missing Families Forum saying that recent evidence from those released, as well as the shocking condition of the hostages released last Saturday, leaves no room for doubt. Time is of the essence, and all hostages must be urgently rescued from this horrific situation. Over to the EU now, where Brussels is planning to hand over more spending powers to EU member states in a radical budget overhaul. According to the Financial Times, which has seen the paper containing the plan, the EU's next common budget, which starts in 2028, would be more ambitious, replacing dozens of rigid spending programs with 3 main funds that give national governments more leeway in how that money gets spent. For context, the EU budget is traditionally financed by a combination of customs duties, national contributions from EU member states, and tax contributions. Currently, about a third of it is allocated to farming subsidies through the Common Agricultural Policy, another third to the EU's least developed regions through its cohesion policy, and the rest covering everything else from foreign aid to EU staff salaries. Anyway, the new proposal involves simplifying this budget. Instead of the current structure with more than 50 rigid spending programs dictating how the funds must be used, the EU Commission would agree a plan for each country with key reforms and investments, including regional funds and farming subsidies, offering member states more flexibility. The paper also outlines a new European Competitiveness Fund to boost investment in key sectors and common projects, and calls for the EU's Foreign Policy Fund to be revamped so that it's more aligned with our strategic interests. Together, these funds could also make way for the EU to allocate a much bigger share of its budget to cross-border defence projects, which haven't been a priority in the past. And finally, in a dramatic twist of the race for AI supremacy, Elon Musk and a coalition of investors have launched a staggering $97.4 billion bid for the non-profit entity that oversees the OpenAI startup. Now, this move has complicated CEO Sam Altman's efforts to transition OpenAI, which was founded by both Musk and Altman in 2015, into a for-profit organization, and establishing a fair valuation for the non-profit company. Musk, whose startup xAI is a direct competitor to OpenAI, invested heavily in the project before leaving OpenAI's board in 2018, and has argued that converting the company to a for-profit model undermines its founding mission focused on research. Musk's attorney says that the charity must be fairly compensated for its control over this transformative technology. Shortly after news broke of the offer, Altman quipped on social media, "No thank you, but we will buy Twitter for $9.74 billion if you want," referencing Musk's 2022 Twitter acquisition. Now, while sources close to OpenAI dismiss Musk's move as a publicity stunt, Altman's rejection of the bid does not necessarily mean that the proposed takeover bid is dead. OpenAI's board will have a say on the company's future, and may favor a sale, especially if the offer is increased, all of which could prove to be incredibly irritating for Altman, who's clearly more focused on transitioning the company himself. Although irritation is something all too familiar to those of us who shave regularly. In fact, lots of people actively don't like shaving. After all, it's expensive, with brands selling overpriced razor cartridges filled with useless technology. And even if you do pay for all of that stuff, you're often left with a bad experience. Razor burn, ingrown hairs, and irritation. That's a problem that Henson Shaving have aimed to solve with their razor, one that's actively designed to protect your skin. In fact, Henson razors are better for 3 reasons. Firstly, Henson's AL13 razor, which they produce at their aerospace machine shop, holds blades at a perfect 30-degree angle, extending the blade only 0.0013 inches past the shave plane. That's less than the thickness of a human hair, and ensures that the blade is supported properly, unlike many other companies' blades, which in turn makes sure that you have a far better shave for your skin. Secondly, they're just cheaper. Those fancy blade cartridges are full of single-use junk, which makes each individual blade vastly more expensive than it has to be. Henson's razor takes totally standard blades, which cost just a few cents, which means that you can save money and can afford to replace your blades more often, so that you don't need to keep dragging a dull razor across your face just to try and get value out of that overpriced plastic. Speaking of plastic, those other cartridges certainly aren't good for the environment either, with 2 billion razor cartridges thrown away every year in the US alone. That's not true of Henson's blades though, which contain 0 plastic, even in their packaging. If you want to try it out, then click the link in the description, add a razor and 100 blades to your cart, and then once you've done that, use our discount code TLDR at checkout, and you'll get all of those blades absolutely free. Using our link and our code also means that they know that you came from us, which really helps us out.